You're not weak because you cry in the shower. You're not weak because you still check your phone hoping he'll text back. You're not weak because some mornings you can't find a reason to get out of bed before 9. You've been calling yourself weak this whole time, when really, you've been in training. Stay with me, because I want to talk about something nobody sat you down and explained. Not your mother, not your pastor, not that friend who always seems to have it together. I want to talk about what it actually means to be a strong woman in God's eyes, because it's nothing like what you've been taught to believe. You've probably pictured her before. The strong woman, calm under pressure, never cries in public. Prayer life locked down, finances organized, relationships healthy, tongue tamed. She doesn't need anyone. She doesn't cry over a man. She doesn't feel insecure when someone else gets the promotion, the marriage, the breakthrough she's been praying for. And then there's you, overthinking a text message at 11 at night, comparing your chapter 3 to somebody else's chapter 20, feeling like you should be further along by now, in your faith, your healing, your life, wondering if you missed something. Maybe you took a wrong turn somewhere and God is still waiting for you to catch up. I need you to hear this clearly. That image of the strong woman you keep comparing yourself to isn't real. It's a performance. What God is actually building in you doesn't look like perfection. It looks like a woman being reshaped from the inside, quietly, in ways nobody claps for. So let's talk about what's really going on underneath your life right now. That tiredness that isn't really about sleep, where you rest for 8 hours and still wake up carrying something. That's not laziness. That's the weight of holding yourself together while nobody's watching. You've been managing so much. Expectations from people who don't understand your season, the pressure to look fine, the private conversations you have with God at 2 a.m., wondering if He even hears you anymore. You second-guess your decisions. You replay conversations from 3 years ago and cringe. You wonder if you said too much, or not enough. You've built an internal courtroom where you're constantly on trial, judge, jury, and defendant, all at once. And even when you win the case, you don't feel relieved. You just move on to the next one. Some of you are carrying rejection that never got closure. Somebody walked away, or never chose you in the first place, and you've spent months, maybe years, trying to figure out what was wrong with you, instead of realizing that sometimes people leave because their season with you finished, not because you were insufficient. Some of you are dealing with delay. You prayed. You believed. You did everything you thought you were supposed to do. Fasted, served, waited, and the door still hasn't opened. There's a quiet fear sitting in your chest that maybe you're doing something wrong, or worse, that God forgot about you. And some of you are just exhausted from holding your own life together while looking fine for everyone else. You're the strong friend, the one people call when they're falling apart. Nobody asks how you're really doing because you've trained them not to. Notice something about all of this: the overthinking, the comparison, the rejection, the delay, the exhaustion. None of it comes from weakness. It comes from carrying weight you were never designed to carry alone. Here's a truth most people skip. Strength was never meant to mean self-sufficiency. Somewhere along the way, you absorbed the idea, from culture, from social media, from watching other women perform confidence, that being strong means needing nothing and no one. But that's not God's definition. That's exhaustion wearing a strong woman's outfit. Look at the woman described in Proverbs 31. People quote her constantly, usually to make other women feel like they're falling short. But look closer. She's described as able to face the future without fear, not because her future is guaranteed to be easy, but because her identity isn't built on controlling outcomes. Her strength comes from a settledness inside her, not from having everything figured out. There's another picture worth sitting with. Paul, in his letters, describing a painful weakness he asked God to remove. God didn't remove it. Instead, God told him his power works best through weak places, not strong ones. Read that again. God's power isn't looking for a woman who has it all together. It's looking for a woman who's honest about what she doesn't have together, because that honesty is exactly where his strength has room to move. This changes how you should look at your current season. That anxiety isn't proof you're failing spiritually. It might be the exact place God wants to show you a strength that isn't your own. That insecurity isn't evidence you're not enough. It might be the invitation to stop performing enoughness and start resting in a worth you didn't create and can't lose. So why do you feel the way you feel? Why does comparison hit so hard? Why does delay feel so personal? Why does rejection cut so deep? Somewhere in your story, you learned that your value was conditional. Maybe nobody said it out loud. But you learned it through affection given and withdrawn, through achievement praised and effort ignored, through relationships where you had to earn closeness instead of simply being given it. Your emotions adapted to survive in a world where love felt like something you had to prove yourself worthy of. That's why you overthink. You're not naturally an overthinker. You became one, because thinking too little once cost you something. You're not naturally insecure. You became guarded, because vulnerability wasn't always safe. You're not naturally exhausted from proving yourself. You learned that rest wasn't an option if you wanted to be seen as valuable. Here's what God is doing in this season, even if it doesn't feel like it. He's not punishing you with delay. He's not testing whether you'll break so he can decide if you deserve the next level. He is slowly, patiently untangling your identity from performance and rebuilding it on something that can't be shaken. The simple, unearned, permanent fact that you are his. This takes real courage to accept, because it means admitting some of the strength you've been proud of was actually armor. God isn't asking you to throw it away recklessly. He's asking you to let him show you what real safety feels like, so the armor becomes optional instead of necessary. The version of you that apologizes for crying, that hides her anxiety behind a smile, that pretends rejection didn't hurt as much as it did, that version doesn't need to keep performing. God isn't disappointed by your tears. He isn't waiting for you to toughen up before he'll use you. He is closest to you exactly in the moments you feel the least impressive. Let's get practical, because understanding this without applying it just leaves you with more head knowledge and the same tired heart. First, a mindset shift. Stop asking, "What's wrong with me?" Every time something painful happens, start asking, "What is this trying to teach me about who I already am in Christ?" Those two questions lead to completely different places. One keeps you stuck in shame. The other moves you toward growth. Second, a daily habit. Every morning, before you check your phone, before the world tells you who you are today, say one sentence out loud. I am not what happened to me. I am who God says I am. It might feel silly at first, but your mind believes what it hears repeated, and it's been repeating fear and comparison for years. Time to interrupt that pattern, every day, until the new sentence is louder than the old one. Third, emotional discipline. Strength doesn't mean suppressing emotions. It means feeling them fully without letting them run the show. When the anxious thought comes, name it. This is fear talking, not truth. Then sit with the discomfort for a few minutes before reacting, before the text you'll regret, before the old pattern. That space between feeling and reacting is where your maturity actually grows. Fourth, a spiritual practice. Start journaling your prayers, even a few lines a day. Not polished, church language prayers. Real ones. Write down what you're actually afraid of, actually angry about, even if it feels irreverent to be angry with God. He can handle your honesty far better than your performance. Writing it down slows the spiral and gives you a record to look back on later, showing how far you've actually come. Fifth, an identity shift. Start seeing yourself not as a woman who's behind or broken, but as a woman currently under construction by someone who doesn't build carelessly. Nobody watches a house mid-construction and calls it ugly. The exposed wiring, the unfinished walls, that's not failure. That's the middle of the project. You are in the middle, not the failure, the middle. What would your life feel like if you believed that fully? If instead of waking up measuring how far behind you are, you asked, God, what are you building in me today? Comparison only works when you're looking at two finished projects, and yours isn't finished. Neither, honestly, is theirs, even if it looks that way from the outside. Some of the pain you're in right now isn't punishment. It's precision. God is removing things that were never meant to be permanent. Relationships that required you to shrink. Opportunities that would have distracted you from your actual purpose. Versions of yourself built on approval instead of truth. It feels like loss because it is loss, but it's the kind that clears space for something that can actually hold weight. Think about Sarah, waiting decades for a promise that seemed expired. Joseph, sitting in a prison cell years after a dream told him he'd rise to leadership. Hannah, praying so intensely for a child the priest thought she was drunk. None of them were being punished. They were being prepared, quietly, in seasons that felt like nothing was happening, for something that would later look sudden, even though it never was. That's what's happening in your waiting right now. In your healing, in your singleness, in your quiet spiritual dryness where prayer feels like talking to a ceiling. It's not a sign of God's absence. It's the shape His presence takes when He's doing something too deep for you to see yet. So what would change this week if you stopped treating your struggles as evidence you're failing, and started treating them as evidence you're being formed? What would you stop apologizing for? What would you stop rushing? What would you finally let yourself feel without shame? You are not late. It feels like everyone around you is further along, but your timeline was never supposed to match theirs. God wrote yours specifically, with specific pacing and purpose, the kind that only makes sense looking back, the way a mountain only makes sense from the summit, never halfway up the climb. You are not too much. Your emotions, your questions, your need for reassurance, none of it disqualifies you from being a strong woman of God. It qualifies you for a deeper kind of strength than the performance you've been chasing. The kind that can be honest in the dark and still choose faith in the morning. And you are not too broken to be used. Rahab had a past she couldn't undo. Ruth had loss that reshaped her whole life. Esther had fear she had to move through, not around. None of them waited until they were flawless to be chosen. They were chosen in the middle of their mess, and the mess became part of the message. So here's what I want you to do today. Not next month, not when you feel ready. Today, take one honest moment with God. Not a polished prayer, a real one. Tell Him where you're actually tired, what you're actually afraid of. Ask Him to show you what He's building in the very thing you've been ashamed of. Then do one small thing. Write one honest line in a journal. Say one true sentence to yourself in the mirror. Give yourself 5 minutes to feel something without judging yourself for it. Strength was never about having it all figured out. It was always about staying soft enough to keep growing and steady enough to keep going. You already have more of it in you than you think. It's just been quietly forming in places you assumed were only proof of your weakness. I'd love to know where you're watching this from. Drop it in the comments. I read every one. If this reminded you that God is still working even in the quiet, unseen seasons of your life, subscribe and stay with us. There's so much more healing, truth, and hope waiting for you here.